What you guys, got another video, things to know before you update the BIOS on your motherboard. Do you really need to update your BIOS? If the system is new or a couple of years old, then there's more than likely going to be updates available for that BIOS. Also, what would you miss out on if you did not flash the BIOS and you just put the motherboard into your computer when you built it and you never flashed the BIOS at all? What would actually happen? Well, these motherboard BIOS updates can do bug fixes, RAM support and CPU support and other things like that. And we'll cover all that in this video. So it's up to you whether you want to update your BIOS. It is pretty straightforward and easy to do. I've made videos on this on how to do a BIOS update or flash in your BIOS, as you can see right here on the screen. Now, an important reason for you to flash the BIOS would be if you was building a brand new computer. If you're building a brand new computer and you've purchased your motherboard, that motherboard could have been sitting in some warehouse or on some store shelf for quite some time. A number of months may have gone by, and that means that BIOS is going to be outdated. Now, on a new motherboard, it's important to keep the BIOS updated because at the very beginning, BIOS releases for that new motherboard will be quite frequent. And these updates may be to improve performance, improve system security, and also improve system stability, especially on brand new motherboards. There's also other reasons why you might want to update your BIOS, and that will be for compatibility reasons and things like that. Another reason to update your BIOS is because if you enable XMP, this can cause a lot of problems with instability with your system, especially if you're on a motherboard that is just been released. It might not have the stability or compatibility released in that BIOS to be able to use the profile that you've set in that BIOS for the particular RAM that you're using. And this can cause, crashes and other problems as well. Now, another thing is Expo, and that can be another problem when you enable Expo. This can be another main reason why you might want to flash your BIOS with the latest version. Now, a couple of warnings here. If you're using BitLocker, it's important that you disable BitLocker before you flash your BIOS, because you will end up being locked out of your drive because you've flashed the BIOS. You could also end up with a more serious problem, which is a BIOS flash fail, which could also cause an issue with the BIOS itself, where you end up bricking the BIOS. Another important step to remember is if you have a power cut and you lose power while you're flashing the BIOS, you will end up bricking the BIOS. There will be no information on that BIOS and the system will be dead. And that will mean you either need to replace the motherboard, or you would need to recode the BIOS, or basically replace the BIOS. And that's important if you have a backup of your BIOS. Unfortunately, not all motherboards come with dual BIOSes where you can easily revert back. And this was a safety net basically. But if you don't have this option and you brick your BIOS by basically turning the power off during the BIOS flashing process, you can have major problems. So make sure you follow those steps. Another thing that you might want to flash the BIOS is if you've got an older AM4 motherboard or something like that, and you want to upgrade the CPU to 5000 series processors. If you bought the motherboard recently, it will probably have had the latest BIOS already flashed to them boards. But if it's an older board and you haven't bought a brand new board and you've had this board for a while, you will need to flash the BIOS to be able to install the latest 5000 series processors on these motherboards. And you can read about this on sites like Gigabyte and Asus and other sites like ASRock. They will all tell you that you'll be able to flash the BIOS, and basically it's a one-time flash. Once you've flashed that BIOS to that latest version, there'll be no going back to that older version as well. So also, you don't really want to flash the BIOS to a beta version. That's not advisable in my personal opinion. Although some motherboard manufacturers may release a beta BIOS version for you if you're having issues. Now, you may also see sometimes by flashing a BIOS that you can improve system performance. This will improve the clock speed and sometimes stability of the system, and also make it even faster. Sometimes you can improve memory compatibility. This means that if you've got memory that you purchased at the time of purchasing that motherboard and it wasn't on the compatibility list, sometimes motherboard manufacturers will release a BIOS update to improve the memory compatibility list. This means that the memory that you may have purchased may be added to that compatibility list, which will obviously help with stability and also XMP settings, profiles, Expo settings as well. And this being added to the motherboard BIOS, this will also make that memory work with that motherboard. When motherboard manufacturers release motherboards, sometimes they put a very small list of recommended memory for that particular motherboard. And this is the same for laptops and desktop PCs. Memory issues with motherboards are a common problem, especially memory timings, XMP settings and things like that can be difficult to set with non-compatibility RAM. Another thing to look into is if you're having temperature issues like the Ryzen 7000 series. The motherboard manufacturers released a beta BIOS, which caused a major problem for a lot of people. People didn't want to do it. There was high voltage going through the board. So motherboard manufacturers released a BIOS, which was a beta BIOS, and they said if you installed it on that board, you would then be voiding your warranty. And of course, there was a big uproar. And of course, eventually they released a BIOS which wasn't in beta and it didn't void your warranty. And of course, it was important to have that BIOS update. So you would have to flash the BIOS to be able to make that CPU more stable and stop it using high voltage through and causing major problems, because it will literally burn that CPU. Someone actually burnt their CPU in the socket and it fried the whole system. So you definitely don't want to do anything like that. And it's important that you update the BIOS for those particular reasons. Another main reason to flash the BIOS is to improve security. We know that there has been issues that have been patched by flashing the BIOS to protect you from virus infection and malicious code and other nasty stuff. There's also bugs that might be an issue with the board that was causing instability. And we also knew about Meltdown and Spectre, there how we had to patch our systems for these exploits that were being used. And again, this is just another reason to flash your BIOS with the latest version. So the BIOS plays an important role on your computer, and sometimes some people like to update their BIOS straight away. If you've got an older system and there might not be any BIOSes available for you because it's an older system, and they don't generally update those BIOSes much on older systems unless there's major problems. Now, some people will live by the saying of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's perfectly fine. If that's one of you people out there, then by all means, that's entirely your choice. Again, if someone breaks or bricks their system, you can be one of those people that say, I told you so. But again, at the end of the day, if you're one of these people that need to upgrade to another CPU, the BIOS might need to be flashed. Again, if you're having instability issues, then you may need to flash that BIOS. There might be people out there that have to flash the BIOS for certain reasons. Anyway, with that said, I hope this video has been some sort of use to you. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Just want to say a quick shout out to all my YouTube members. I appreciate the support, and I shall catch you in the next video. Bye for now.